For more than a century, the United States has depended on its naval might not only to defend the homeland, but to project power across the world. Yet behind the triumphant stories told in textbooks, behind D-Day, Midway, the Pacific Island campaigns, and the Cold War standoff, there exists another story. A quieter one, a stranger one, a story built not from battles, but from the ships that survived them. They call them mothball fleets, but sailors, historians, and locals who live near the abandoned anchorages have another name: ghost fleets. These ships, once the beating heart of America's wartime machine, now float in rows stretching beyond the horizon. They sit in silence, their hulls rusting, their decks collapsing, and their stories, some glorious, some dark, slowly dying in the salt air. And yet, every one of these ships holds secrets. Secrets to government once guarded fiercely. Secrets that shaped wars, toppled regimes, and altered the future of global power. This is the forgotten history of those ships. The story of America's floating ghost fleets does not begin with war. It begins with fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of the next battle. Fear that the world might once again demand more steel, more firepower, more ships than the nation could build in time.
In the closing months of World War II, as American factories roared day and night, a question quietly troubled military planners in Washington. What happens after the war ends? The United States had built the largest naval force in human history, thousands of ships, from tiny patrol boats to monstrous aircraft carriers. Once peace arrived, most of them would no longer be needed. But what if peace didn't last? What if the world plunged into conflict again? The solution was ambitious and a little eerie. Preserve the ships. Keep them ready. Store them somewhere they could sleep until the next war. Thus, in 1946, the first mothball fleets were born. Officially, they were called the National Defense Reserve Fleet. Unofficially, men who served near them began calling them something else: the ghost fleets.
They drift in silence. Thousands of tons of steel, haunted decks, blacked-out windows and corridors that haven't felt a human footstep in decades. To most Americans, they don't even exist. But scattered along hidden bays and fog-covered rivers, entire armadas of forgotten U.S. warships lie anchored in eerie stillness. These are the ghost fleets of America, floating relics of wars won, secrets buried, and histories deliberately left to fade. Just northeast of San Francisco, tucked behind tidal marshes and fog-wrapped hills, lies Suisun Bay. Today, most drivers cross the Benicia Martinez Bridge without ever noticing the quiet rows of ships anchored far out on the water. But in the late 1940s, Suisun Bay became home to more than 500 vessels. Liberty ships, Victory ships, tankers, troop transports lined up in eerie formation. To the locals, it was like a city of giants had appeared overnight. At sunrise, the silhouettes of these hulking forms towered above the mist. At night, their dark shapes blended together, forming a metallic mountain range floating on the water. Sailors assigned to maintain the fleet swore the ships made noises on their own. Deep groans, soft clangs, whispers of wind rushing through broken stanchions. Many refused to work the night shifts. But the Ghost Fleet wasn't just a graveyard of ships, it was a vault of secrets.
Few Americans know that some of the early Ghost Fleet vessels were used to transport classified cargo from World War II, documents, materiel, and sometimes people. During Operation Paperclip, when the US secretly brought over 1,600 German scientists, including former Nazi engineers, to build America's rocket and weapons programs, several ships in the reserve fleet played quiet supporting roles. Declassified memos from 1962 confirmed that 2 Suisun Bay vessels temporarily housed crates containing V-2 rocket components. Some sailors later insisted they saw more than just machinery. Files, sealed crates, and one container they believed was refrigerated, guarded day and night. What was in it? No one knows. The logs from that week are missing.
On the opposite side of the country, along a quiet stretch of Virginia's James River, another ghost fleet grew. By the early 1950s, over 700 ships slept in the muddy water, some dating back to the final days of World War I. Locals told stories that the fleet hummed at night, as if the engines remembered their missions. Historians later discovered that several of those ships had served in covert operations, transporting materials used in early nuclear research, carrying spies across the Atlantic under false registries, or shadowing Soviet trawlers during the first chilly years of the Cold War. Some still carried classified compartments welded shut.
When North Korean troops stormed across the 38th parallel in June 1950, Washington faced a nightmare. The U.S. military had shrunk dramatically after World War II, but the ghost fleets had been created for exactly this moment. Within weeks, reserve ships were reactivated, brought back from the dead. Engineers boarded the silent vessels, clearing out nests of seabirds and raccoons, scraping rust from engines, and pumping out water from flooded compartments. Many ships came back to life with startling speed. A sailor who worked the reactivation later said, "It was like waking up an old monster and watching it remember who it was." Over 500 Ghost Fleet ships served in the Korean War. Some never returned. Others drifted back into the lines, once again silent.
By the late 1950s, America's ghost fleets had already become the subject of local folklore. But it was during these years that an even stranger rumor began circulating through naval circles. It concerned a group of decommissioned ships that, for a brief time, were anchored off the East Coast before being transferred to the James River Reserve Fleet. According to sailors stationed in Florida, these ships, mostly aging destroyers escorts, reported unusual compass behavior during their final voyages. One officer wrote that his compass spun like a carnival wheel for nearly an hour, even though the sea was calm. Officially, the Navy dismissed these accounts as mechanical failure. Unofficially, stories spread that the ships had skirted the edge of a region already steeped in myth, the Bermuda Triangle. Were the ships affected by strange magnetic anomalies, or were the sailors' imaginations simply stirred by the triangle's legendary reputation? No one can say for certain, but when those vessels eventually joined the Ghost Fleet, they were assigned to a quiet, isolated corner, away from the main rows. Some maintenancers claimed the Navy wanted those ships kept separate.
When the Cold War reached its freezing peak, the ghost fleets became essential in ways the public would not learn about for half a century. Several ships held components used in early nuclear propulsion research. Others were used to test classified communication systems, including early prototypes of long-range encrypted radio. One ship, the SS Tulare Victory, purportedly contained an experimental navigation device which engineers claimed could detect Soviet submarines by analyzing micro-changes in ocean salinity. The logs for this device vanished in 1973. Workers assigned to these ships sometimes told unsettling stories. One maintenance crew reported hearing rhythmic tapping from inside a sealed compartment, a compartment that had been welded shut since 1947. When they opened it, they found nothing but empty bunks and dust. Another crewman claimed he saw lights flickering inside an unpowered ship at night. When he boarded it the next morning, the wiring had been removed. Whether these accounts were real or simply the result of long, lonely shifts is impossible to prove, but the legends persisted.
When the Vietnam War escalated, America again turned to its silent armadas. Dozens of cargo vessels, tankers, and troop transports were reactivated. Some carried ammunition to Southeast Asia. Others transported vehicles, helicopters, or medical supplies. One ship, the SS Core, became famous for delivering the first American helicopters used in Vietnam. What few people know is that the ship had been sitting in the Ghost Fleet for nearly a decade before being revived. Vietnam-era sailors reported that reactivated reserve ships often behaved strangely during their voyages. Engines misfiring without explanation, radios receiving bursts of static in patterns resembling Morse code, hulls vibrating as if something large brushed against them underwater. Engineers blamed aging machinery. Superstitious crew members blamed the ghosts.
Keeping a massive steel ship asleep for decades required ingenious engineering. Each ship was drained of fuel, sealed with protective coatings, and filled with dry air. Decks were coated in preservative grease. Windows were boarded. Doors were welded shut. The ships were placed in tight rows, moored together with thick steel cables. Walking between them during maintenance checks felt like exploring a metallic canyon. The air was still. The water barely moved. The silence was so complete that a dropped wrench echoed like gunfire. It was in these conditions that Ghost Fleet workers often reported the strangest phenomena. Voices carried on the wind, footsteps on empty decks, chains clinking on ships with no active machinery. Officially, the Navy blamed thermal expansion. Unofficially, the workers had their own theories.